Good morning, and yes, it's Sue Mohrman, and this is actually a continuation of a series of webinars that we've had over the last couple of years, and it's connected to a model and approach to managing change that Chris and I and others at CEO have been working on that we think is trying to move the change management field and the set of frameworks and approaches that are used forward to fit with what's happening in the environment and the market space that companies have to succeed in. And we've, in previous webinars, used the term change management is obsolete. And what we're really meaning is the tools and approaches that we've tended to use to change management are simply not able to deal with the reality of change in today's world. So we're going to today I'm going to frame that issue. Eric is going to provide us with what I think is a wonderful example of a company that's in the midst of all this and is a great example of a company that's using different approaches to change, the Gap Inc. And then Chris is going to tie this, share our change framework and tie it to the whole concept of agility, which we think is fundamental to organizations being able to cope with the amount of change that is in their environment today. As you'll see on the slide, when we started CEO decades ago, the world was pretty stable, simple, domestic, and focused on performance. The companies we were dealing with, that's what they were trying to get more and more effective in that really well-describable, simple space. People now call it the VUCA world. It's dynamic, it's complex, it's global. It's focused on sustainability, which is a very new outcome for most companies, and they're just trying to figure out what that really means. And that has thrown a monkey wrench into some of their change challenges as well, because it really complexifies the space and the set of outcomes that you have to be considering. What it means for change and transformation is that change management once was around a sequential focused set of initiatives and transformations. And you have this sense when you talk to people in companies as well as change management leaders that we're going to manage this transformation. We know what the steps are. We get people prepared. We get their information, get them informed. We do the interventions that are required to move them to a different way of operating and thinking about the organization. And then we lock that in by building the systems to reinforce it. And then we go on and we do the real work of the organization. We don't think that that's probably the way to think about change now, and it's not the world you all are facing. It used to be amenable to a very detailed change plan, and in fact, good change management was having a great, thorough, complete Gantt chart-oriented set of change interventions and implementing that with the belief that you would then have a transformed organization. And it was usually aimed at specific strategies. That there were strategy changes or there were things the organization wanted to accomplish in its environment, and you could actually direct all of the change activities to bring the organization into alignment with that new way of operating. Now it seems to be, excuse me, I'm so sorry, that there are many, many changes going on simultaneously, not just one strategic redirection, but lots of vectors of change coming at the organization. We have to be more sustainable. We have to deal with the millennials. We have to deal with the fact that our market is consolidating. We have to deal with the fact that there's new technological capabilities and startups are coming in and can steal our market space. It's all happening at the same time. And that way of thinking about change that's on the left-hand side of this picture just doesn't really fit in that kind of environment. In fact, what you often get is someone who's managing sustainability, someone who's managing our employment contract for the new millennial generation, someone who's managing the spinning off of a new capability to compete with a new startup that's taken our market space. And they're all going on simultaneously, and they're all extraordinarily complex changes in and of themselves. How do you operate in that environment? And we sort of come to the realization that what's really needed to be developed in order to manage change is a capability of adapting continuously from within the organization. And as the title of this webinar suggests, That may be from the bottom, that may be from one component of the organization, that may be from the top. It's less likely than historically was the case for the top to be able to command this set of confusing and conflicting changes. And what you get is dueling changes in organizations. And the only really good defense against that is to have in the organization the capability to adapt, the capability for those measures to come together and for people to understand all that's on their plate and figure out themselves and in their own units and in their own cross units how they cope and deal with all of that change. So we've started to talk about developing a change capability, and in Chris and Tom Williams and others' research, it's really developing the change capability to be able to support an agile way of functioning, not a directed way towards a specific set of campaigns and outcomes. So the contemporary approaches, and contemporary could be in quotation marks here, to managing fundamental change. What you might say is best practice is a real huge stress on executive leadership role. When you talk to people about what we need to do to make this change happen, it's always get more executive commitment, make the executives much more out there managing it. Again, looking to the top for all the solutions in a changing environment where one executive team or executive can't possibly be the source of adapting to all the different things that are going on in the organization. A lot of risk analysis and mitigation in an environment that requires actually a lot of risk-taking, and I think this is a very big tension in change management. Carefully planned one-way communication. If we say it 7 times or we say it 9, or if the executive, every time he gets up or she gets up and talks to a team, repeats, why are we doing this, what are we doing, what are our outcomes, what do we expect from you? Playbooks, scripts, tools so you can pass them out and have people read and understand their role and then execute it, which sort of has an image of being a peg in a pegboard that, here's your role, stick it in, and here's what you do, and please change your behavior and the way you manage accordingly. Developing a transition structure with work streams, initiative, Gantt charts, plans, all of which get pretty much blown up, except for the big contours. Once you actually start figuring out what you're running into in the way of what has to change in the organization, it's more complex than you thought. There's more places where you really have to work things out in order to move forward, maybe slow down in order to go faster. And the amount of time that's spent on all those Gantt charts and so forth is questionable in today's world because they can become obsolete extremely quickly. I'm painting a very one-sided, lopsided picture of all this because what we really believe is these are all important elements of complex transitions, but because they all stem from the center out, they're really not able to handle the fact that in today's complex world, the change capability really needs to come from all directions in the organization. And that accelerating change, it requires leadership, learning, and engagement throughout the organization. This is where I think those of you who have heard Chris talk about agility, Chris and Tom and Ed, the whole notion of leadership as a capability, not a person, comes to play. And the way I've come to think of it is, in that kind of space, what are the high-impact interventions you can do to get people in the organization disposed to change and looking to see what needs to change and seeing it as their responsibility, but also empowering them to make the changes required to move the organization in the direction that the organization is trying to move in, where it's a strategic plan and market requirements really call for a lot of simultaneous behavior that can't possibly be orchestrated fully from the top. We're going to look at Gap Inc., and we have had the fortune of working with Gap Inc. They've been a good, loyal, and partner of ours for a long time as they've gone through pretty remarkable fundamental transition in the way that they run their organization. And Eric is going to share with us some of the things that are coming at Gap Inc. right now. The things he talks about will build on years of thinking about change, And I think the point that I'd like to start out with is all of this is a series of changes. Eric's going to share what they're working on now, but if you talk to Eric 4 years ago, he was working on equally complex, equally important kinds of changes that have all fed into where Gap is now, but have led to even more changes that he's leading, and the environment has changed so that the tapestry of change initiatives is constantly in flux. And Eric, I thank you for agreeing to come and share this rich story. And what I'd like everyone to listen to is not just the specifics of what Eric's talking about, because they're fascinating, but the whole tapestry of change and the strategies that Gap Inc. is using to allow people in that organization to adapt to what they have to deal with in today's environment. Eric.
Well, thank you, Sue. It's an honor to be here. And what I hope to do in the next few minutes is use the Gap Inc. story as an illustration of the principles of iterative change that Sue just articulated. So I'm going to show you a number of different examples. I'm not going to go into depth on any of the individual slides. I want to use them as proof points that illustrate the principles that Sue just enumerated. So our story is really about how we, as a large global corporation, have had to adapt to a rapidly changing global environment. So here's what I'm going to go over. I'm just going to quickly set some context for how our world at Gap has changed based on the accelerated change within our marketplace. Talk a little bit about the transformation of retail as an example of what's driving the need for building change and agility capability, and then talk about how we have had to build that capability within the talent base of the business, what I'm calling enabling the people who run the business to run faster in order to respond to that rapid change. And then finally, close with a couple of examples of how HR is making that change happen in the field of sustainability. So I'm just going to start with quickly what's causing the need for change within our marketplace. So this is a busy chart, but all I want you to kind of focus on is the red boxes, which illustrate the projected compounded annual growth rate of the apparel market between 2013 and 2018. And what you can see is all of the growth is outside of the U.S., and there's rapid growth continuing. So that's one important factor, that our sector is growing, but it's not growing where it historically has grown in its largest market, which is the U.S. It's actually growing at a faster rate outside the U.S., which causes the need for quick change and adaptation of those companies that were focused on the U.S. In this slide, you see a second factor that's driving unprecedented change within our sector, and that is the mobile and digital revolution. There are some analysts in our space who have said that the current period is the greatest period of change in retail commerce, probably in millennia, since global trade routes were established. That might be hyperbole, but it certainly is a time of the most rapid change in our sector, certainly in the lifetime of anyone who's on the line right now. And this is essentially illustrated here as you see that between 2004 and 2012, how web-influenced sales have come to dominate. It used to be all sales really were in a store, and that has shifted to sales that happen in a store now. The majority of them start on the web, with customers searching on the web for what they want to buy. This has caused a revolution in the focus of this industry that was once very tactile, hands-on about mercantile skills in a store, to now requiring radical new capabilities in digital technology and technology in general. You see on this slide another illustration of that. So on the left, you see the penetration of sales online over time growing. You can see the curve of the line growing over time in projections up through 2020. Very rapid pace of change. And on the right, you see even in the static, slow-growing U.S. market, all of the growth that's going to happen, for the most part, is going to happen online. So these just illustrate how much our life has changed. Literally, we weren't even using the term digital 5 years ago within our sector. It wasn't even a term we really understood. And this next slide just illustrates that even within the digital space, what's going on is it's all moving to mobile. So just in the last couple of years, we have had to shift our focus from online to mobile technology, which has dramatically changed the way everything is done in our sector. It's changed how people shop. It's changed how we have to interact with them. And in the next few slides, I'm going to show you how we've responded to that. Essentially, what we know now is that certainly by 2020, the nature of what people do in a store is going to dramatically change. By that time, same day and next day delivery is going to be standard, most analysts predict, which means that the role of the store, which has been the same since time immemorial, is going to dramatically shift as people no longer need to go to a store to get merchandise. They can get it anywhere online just as fast. So what the store has to represent is a very different human experience. So here are a few of the things that have changed how we've had to adapt operationally, and then I will get to how we've had to change our capabilities to enable these fast, rapid operating changes. So first is what we call the collision of digital and physical, that they're not two separate things like they were 5 years ago, where you had online and an online channel and bricks and mortar stores. Now there's an integration. The customer actually seamlessly weaves them together. She's in the store. She is using Instagram to send images of things she likes to her friends, or to take a picture and post it on Facebook and ask friends how they like the outfit. All these things are going on at the same time, changing how we have to react. On this slide, you see it's just several very clear, specific components of what we call our Omni-Channel Strategy, and a strategy that didn't even exist 3 or 4 years ago, and it's all come about. Everything I'm going to show you has come about in the last year and represents now a significant portion of our sales, but it's all developed in the last year. So this first example is called Find in Store. It was the first capability we developed about a year ago. And that's the ability for customers to determine whether or not what they want is actually in a store by taking our inventory and putting it online and making it visible to customers. It's a huge part of driving what we call conversion, the ability of when somebody wants something to actually acquire it. This next is Reserve in Store. So this is the ability for customers, if they find what they want, to reserve it in the store nearest them and make sure when they get there, it's waiting for them. So that's the next capability we built that helps us to drive conversion and market share. And again, this didn't exist a year ago. In order of complexity, Order in Store, this is another digital strategy that we've put in place to also drive conversion. An historic problem in retail is when customers go to a store, they want something and it's not available, but it's available perhaps in another store or online, and this enables a customer to be able, if she doesn't find her size in the store, in this dress, for example, to be able to buy it and have it delivered to her perhaps next day at her home. So in the omni-channel space, what's going on is we have had to acquire engineering skills and as well as completely re-engineer our store processes to comport with these new capabilities developed in a 12-month period, which requires an incredible change in how we work. To Sue's earlier point, we've been wired for most of our history in what's called a waterfall project management approach, where things are done sequentially and there are pass-offs from one functional expert to another. We have had to adopt much more rapid methodologies like the Agile software development methodology in order to keep up with the demand to get things done and implemented before our competition. So the second example I'm just going to show you of this is responsive supply chain. So in addition to our store actually being much more responsive to the changing needs of the consumer, our supply chain needs to be as well. So Gap was what most analysts consider to be the first specialty apparel retailing chain that came about in the late 1960s. Before that, there were essentially just department stores or small retail stores. for many, many years, most of our history, the way things were done in specialty apparel, retail, supply chain, is there were about 1-year lead times, and designers would go to New York or to Paris runway shows, and what showed up there would generally make its way into ready-to-wear about a year later, and we would all design our lines based on that and produce them. What's happened in the last 10 years is that with global and digital innovation, and in particular the spread of the internet, trends spread much faster. And now our largest global competitors are able to get product to market in a matter of weeks instead of months. So at Gap, we have had to move with that change to ensure that our supply chain can be as responsive. So this is just a couple examples of how this happened. So we've had to move from a push to a pull model, which is what our largest competitors have, a consumer demand-driven model where instead of us going and designing lines and then pushing them out to the customers, we are listening for what the customers want and quickly being able to pull to the stores what the customer is desiring. So one of the ways is through what's called fabric platforming. This is an example I'm giving you of how this is done. And it's where instead of buying thousands of different fabrics a year, you buy a small number in large quantities and you platform them, and you don't dye them and cut them and use them until you are sure of product assortment you have. And this allows us to cut costs, but also to move very quickly to be able to use tried and true fabrics that have quality assurance and get them out to customers quickly. Similar, something called vendor managed inventory, where the vendor owns the inventory instead of us, allows us to quickly get the inventory to the stores and the customers who want it the fastest instead of having to lug it around through big distribution centers. And then lastly, rapid response is a new capability we've developed in the last 18 months, which is an approach where instead of buying huge multi-million-dollar lots of inventory way in advance and pushing it out to customers, we are able to manufacture a small percentage of initial product in, say, a particular color, and based on consumer demand, quickly buy it and replenish it so that we don't have huge backlogs of merchandise on hand that have to be marked down. So those are just a few examples of the changes we've made. If you look at the very best practices going on that we are emulating, this is just a look at one of our competitors and what they do. And what they have done is taken what traditionally has been, say, a 32 to 52 week process to produce garments, and usually samples have tended to take up to 30 weeks to produce from design to sample. This is a competitor who is able to produce from sketches and designs and get them to sample within half a day. And that includes even being able to photograph them and get them up online within a day. That's the kind of speed and agility that's going to win in the marketplace. And that is the kind of capability we have to develop in a matter of months rather than a matter of years. So now I want to switch gears and talk about what we are having to do inside the company to build that capability Sue was talking about, to execute on technical operating initiatives like the ones I just showed you. In order to actually build those kinds of capabilities within the time frame they're needed, we actually have to build a capability within the talent of the organization to move that quickly. So one of the ways is that we are beginning to adopt Agile approaches, and there's Agile with a big capital A and Agile with a small a. Agile with a capital A is literally a specific software development methodology that is now spread outside of the software domain to any production process. And while we use it in part of our technology team to develop solutions like the ones I showed you earlier, like ship from store or reserve in store, we're also using it in other places, including it being the foundational change methodology within HR. And it started with this, what's on this slide, in 2000, something called the Agile Manifesto, developed by some software designers in Utah, has since spread throughout the technology industry. And essentially with Agile, you also see its forerunners were things like the Toyota production system, where similar concepts have created competitive advantage for the Japanese auto industry and allowed it to steal market share. Things like small self-managed teams working together through collaboration to own a whole product end-to-end, transparency to process, et cetera, that inform this rapid adaptation to customer needs. So what is an Agile culture? As I said, it's both a big A, tools and processes and methods, but it's also a small a Agile, which means a shift in mindset, how you work, behaviors, and environment. So I'm going to show you some ways that we have shifted the mindset, the behaviors, and the environment of the company to create greater adaptation, speed, and agility. So just to kind of give you an example, what we're trying to go from to, as in this slide, is from what we call anti-Agile behaviors on the left. They're traditional behaviors that large corporations tend to value in the 20th century: authoritarian, rigid structures, bureaucratic, conservative, territorial, controlling, to what's on the right underneath the sun: customer value focus, empowerment, embracing and driving change, resourcefulness, which means adaptation to changing conditions, and continuous learning. So here are some ways we tried to grow that set of characteristics on the right. And I'm just going to quickly go through each of these three examples: the results-only work environment, growth mindset, and grow, perform, succeed, performance management. So the first is the results-only work environment. A lot of you have probably heard of it. We started implementing the results-only work environment in 2008 and have implemented it through much of our headquarters environment where the product is designed and assorted. And the idea behind the results-only work environment is it's blowing up the way work gets done. It's not a flexible work arrangement program. Instead, you free people to do whatever they want, whenever they want, wherever they want, as long as the work gets done. And the idea here is to allow individual people to adjust their behavior to the very fastest, most efficient ways to work. And it's essentially a win-win system in the spirit of sustainability, where the company ensures that business objectives are getting met while employees improve their ability to achieve work-life flexibility. So just a few reasons why this is a solution for us. We have a workforce that is about 80% millennial and 73% female. And essentially what we've learned about our workforce, which is true in general of millennials and the workforce more broadly, is that work-life flexibility is consistently in the top 3 drivers of employee engagement and employee attraction. It appeals also to Gen Y's demands for autonomy, balance, and flexibility. And so it's giving us a source of competitive advantage in the talent marketplace, while it's also helping us to move more flexibly and faster. This slide just illustrates the results that we have achieved with Row in different domains of productivity, quality of product, service levels, et cetera, as we've managed that pre and post implementation. This is just an example of some qualitative results we have achieved with results-only work environment, including the second bullet here, which is that we've had a number of instances of people reporting they've turned down job offers, including for promotions at other organizations, in order to keep the level of autonomy and empowerment they have in a Row environment. And these just show similar results in the Gap brand, where the blue bars are post-Row implementation on each of these domains of business performance. And you'll see the blue bars are longer, better performance after implementation. So the second example of a change initiative to drive greater agility in the workforce is our performance management reengineering, which is called GPS, or Grow, Perform, Succeed. What's significant about this is that the naming is that GPS has multiple dimensions of meaning. So it stands for Grow, Perform, Succeed, but it also stands for our stock ticker, which is GPS, which is to remind people that our North Star is going to be our stock ticker, because our stock price is probably the best metric that represents whether or not we are satisfying our multitude of stakeholders, including our shareholders and our customers. When we are satisfying our shareholders and our customers, our stock price goes up. So the other important part of GPS, invested in the name, is the idea of global positioning systems. So in our iconography for the program, we leverage that metaphor, and it's for this reason. Historically, GAP has had a traditional performance management system based on setting annual goals, annual reviews, and annual performance ratings. This new GPS system is based on the most current neuroscience as well as mindset psychology, and it's designed to cause people to constantly adapt to changing market conditions and needs by resetting their objectives 12 times a year. So instead of once a year getting evaluated, employees have conversations every month, 12 times a year with their manager, where they are discussing how they are progressing against their goals and how their goals need to be adjusted or changed, very much like a GPS system that doesn't wait until after you get to the destination to tell you that you took a wrong turn 5 miles back. It keeps adjusting all along the way as you change course to get you to your destination. And this is just the iconography of GPS. You can see the sort of global positioning references, and these are just indicators that we no longer have ratings or reviews. And essentially, this is some qualitative information so far about what employees and leaders are saying about the GPS system. They are very much responding to the freedom it gives them to be able to work together collaboratively to achieve constantly evolving goals. And then lastly, I just want to show you another initiative we've undertaken to change how we work. So ROW is about freeing people from the invisible constraints of having to work in a particular place at a particular time in a particular way. GPS is about freeing them to be able to adapt throughout the year instead of being held rigidly to goals set at one time and place. And our office shift is about freeing our professional workers to be able to work together in whatever way works for them without the constraints of physical boundaries. So we right now have an office that looks like these, a bunch of cubicles and a bunch of offices that, as you can see, have very rigid boundaries, and people sit in functional groups. What we're moving to is one where there's much more choice of interaction. So we're moving to what's called an open address workspace that we're piloting this spring, which is one in which no one, regardless of level, and that will include myself, will have an assigned space. We are all using what's called a palette of place, where there are dozens of different types of environments, as you see here, in all different configurations and heights, that everyone will use depending on their needs. And what it does is free people to work with whomever they need to work with rather than simply their functional group. Just a few more images of, these are not our actual work environment, but they're examples of what it will look like. And you'll see there's the ability to stand, the ability to sit, all different kinds of spaces and environments that are designed to enable people to adapt to the changing needs of the moment, and a lot of emphasis on digital communication so that people in our offices around the world can easily interact face-to-face. A couple more examples of this. And then I want to give you a quick example of an initiative, how HR is applying this also to changing itself and how we manage business processes that are talent related. So we are actually applying Agile with a big A, so the Agile development methodology, project management methodology, to one of our most important long-range plan initiatives, which is called Streamlined Hiring. And this is our initiative to blow up and re-engineer how we hire a person to find the very most efficient and effective ways to do this. How we would have done it in the past is build out a project plan for a whole year, build an approach, and then launch the whole thing. Instead, what we're doing is doing it iteratively using rapid prototyping, transparency, and other methods to start rolling things out right away in quick burst iterations every 6 weeks. And this is just an example of a team doing part of the Agile process which is identifying user experiences. It's the user experience workshop, which is part of the Agile process. It's just showing you people doing that kind of stuff. Then lastly, I just want to kind of finish up by saying other ways that we are applying Agile more with a small a to how we do work. So traditionally in HR, we set goals at the beginning of the year and throughout the year execute against those. And I'm just going to show you two quick examples of how we have instead over the last year created capacity to be able to jump on emerging marketplace opportunities that were not on our long-range plan or our annual goals, but because of this capacity we built, we're able to take advantage of these opportunities that are competitively differentiating and are also examples of sustainability in the business cycle. So where what we are doing is changing how we do business so that it improves our business and our competitiveness, at the same time contributing value back to our customer and our communities in which we do business. So this first example is simply of our minimum wage initiative. And you see a picture here of President Obama and one of our sales associates in our Manhattan store. I think this is his first shopping excursion since becoming president that he did deliberately because he wanted to show support for the idea of increasing the minimum wage, which we did last January. And it's an example of agility because it is something that emerged last November when our CEO was listening to the president's an address he gave in November talking about the minimum wage, and our CEO said, I see that this is going to be the future. I think this is going to be a big issue in the midterm elections, and I think there could be some huge competitive advantage for us if we are a first mover on this, particularly since we have an objective to upgrade the talent in our stores, given the initiatives I showed you earlier that are going to help to increase the importance of high-touch service in the stores. So long story short, we made a very big investment, and we decided between late November and the State of the Union address in January to do this, and announced it in less than 2 months after first contemplating it. And it has been a huge success for us. Secondly, a similar initiative happened later in 2014 when there was much discussion publicly about pay equality. And we recognize that because we are a company that is dominated by women and most of our leaders are women, that we had a potential to be a leader here that would help both us and the cause. So we assessed our own pay equality and discovered that we actually have perfect pay equality both globally and across levels where men and women make equal amounts to do the same job. So we went public with this information after having it validated by a third-party expert, and this is just an example of one of the news pieces about it from BuzzFeed. So from here, we're going to continue this. So we're going to continue to train all of HR in Agile methodology, work on silo busting and rapid prototyping and rewarding agility both within HR and within the business going forward. And these are just a few examples, some initiatives we've already planned for 2015 to which we're applying the Agile approach, our Let's Do More Women's initiative, where we continue to build on our status as an employer of choice for women, and then well-being and proactive sourcing of talent, and probably many more things that we haven't planned on because of the continuing dynamic nature of the marketplace. So with that, I'm going to turn the discussion back over to Chris.
Thanks, Eric. It's got to be the second or third time I've heard several of these things, and they continue to be just absolutely fascinating. And sort of, hearing about how Gap is addressing and paying attention to what's going on in its environment and the complexity of the response that you're engaging in. Again, I never seem to get tired of listening to that kind of stuff because it's such a great example of the kinds of things that Sue and I are seeing in organizations as they try and approach these Agile kinds of capabilities. for many of you who've been on our webinars before, you've seen this diagram of agility and how we think about organization agility as kind of this pyramid. And sitting at the top is this set of routines that allows the organization to rapidly respond short-term and long-term, as Eric has described the GAP doing. So it's a really complex thing, and we talk about what those routines are, so that allows the organization to change over and over again better than the competition, and allows them to sustain their performance over a long period of time. One of the things I think we talk about in both the org design workshops and the thing that we'll talk about in the Beyond Change Management seminar in February is that agility is a really complex routine. It's a complex capability. It's not just one system, but again, I think Eric's presentation here emphasizes how important it is to look at agility as a set of structures, systems, processes, objectives, and it's how those things all fit together that really result in this agile capability. If we think about the kinds of things Eric was talking about in the GAP, I think what we hear is that most of the things he's talking about are capabilities and management practices. In fact, I really like the notion about how he started the presentation in looking at the environment and saying we need these capabilities to be effective in this environment. And then he went into what is the organization doing to put in those good management practices that will support the capabilities they need to be effective. So I think most of the presentation focuses on those management practices and capabilities. That's one of the really kind of interesting findings out of the agility research, is how critical those base fundamental management practices are to enable agility. And those base management practices have two sort of features. One is they're flexible. They can change, they will change, they're able to change as the organization needs them to support new capabilities. And then the second feature that's really interesting, and I want to pick up on it on the GPS notion, is they improve the organization's clock speed. Before Jay Galbraith passed away, the thing he was really starting to pay attention to in this new environment was how do you increase the clock speed of an organization. And just looking at the GPS, they moved from an annual process of setting goals annually to a new clock speed of monthly that says we got to pay attention to what people are working on. Let's talk about what you're going to be doing over the next month, and rapidly adjusting those as we need to in order to hit the objectives that we've got set for ourselves over the long run. So I think as a backdrop, the agility pyramid helps us think about the GAP case as a specific and helps us put some of those ideas into context. If I go a little deeper now into those issues, I'll come back to Sue's introduction. Change is no longer, if it ever was, this sort of linear, let's do one change at a time kind of idea. Eric clearly laid out the challenges that the GAP is facing on multiple fronts. And it's interesting to sort of think about or talk about somebody, someone, something, some system, some concept has to be thinking about how all of these things fit together and integrate. The supply chain group could run off and do whatever they wanted, and they could be more agile. HR could run off and do their thing and be more agile. The facilities and the retail stores could go off. The digital folks could go off. But that would not serve the purpose. And so it's interesting to think about the coordination that has to happen among all those things. And what we see in the Agile organizations is it's sort of like all three. There is someone who's responsible. There is some group who takes on some accountability. And there's also some concept that we tend to call organization identity that acts in the absence of anybody or any group saying what's supposed to happen, it provides clues to the organization and the members in the organization about how they're supposed to behave. So I think this coordination issue becomes really critical in the whole thing. And we're going to introduce what Sue and I have been calling the engage and learn model. And we think it does a pretty good job of reframing the change management process and the change management question. And it encourages people to think about a set of activities, not a linear set of activities, but a set of activities, all of which might be going on at the same time, and moves through cycles of change that are happening and how these things get coordinated. Around the outside of the model, we talk about awareness, design, tailoring, and assessing. And if you think about Eric's presentation, he touches on all of these things. Again, not necessarily in a linear fashion, but all of these things were present in what he was doing. So I'm just going to start with assessing. I could start anywhere in the model. But if you listen to, for example, how he talked about the results-only work environment, there was quick data gathering before and after the implementation. They never talk about, through the GPS, about how change is going to be over. Change is something that they are engaging in all the time, and they're using transparency to help people understand and assess whether or not the changes that are going on are working and supporting each other. If I flip up to awareness, clearly the beginning of Eric's presentation was all about being aware of what's happening in this fused digital physical world. Even the digital notion is already becoming a bit stale as we keep talking about mobile and shifting things to a mobile platform, and the differences in how people are behaving in their consumer behavior, and the responsibility that exists out there for an organization to pay attention not only to its bottom line, but to its employees on a social point of view and environmentally, and how the organization thinks about its products and services and the design process and how it interacts with the ecology and all of that. The organization is clearly aware of what's happening in all these spheres and thinking about how do we adjust and adapt. The presentation talked, and one of the great parts about the presentation is how many things the GAP is addressing at the same time. The centrality of the supply chain and how it has to move and shift and change in order to support a new capability. The importance of designing collaboration within the organization, whether it's in recruiting or the design process or the relationship between the digital omni-channel strategy that he described. There's all kinds of changes in the work process that are happening. It's no longer a designer coming up with a set of fabrics and accessories that gets put out to bid and goes to the factories and then long distribution and supply chains. They're rapidly prototyping things now in store, near store, and all of that. Clearly, the performance management system is a design issue. It's a clear part of the STAR model to think about how rewards and people processes get put together, and then he talked about the physical environment, allowing and supporting the ROW initiative in the way people do their work. So there's each of these issues, with supply chain or digital presence and website design and transparency in the inventory system, those are all issues of design by themselves. And one of the things that Sue and I keep seeing people do is they take these design issues, and there's a generic set of design issues, but they don't use them generically. They tailor them. And so there's the great slide in Eric's presentation about why did we choose ROW. Designing work for people is a design problem, and you could go down several different paths. But Gap Inc. said, no, but we have a certain culture, a certain set of values, a certain kind of workforce, and we want to adjust how we do things. And so the row process, the flexibility in their management processes, they're testing and learning and trying things out and see if it works on short cycles, again, using the metaphor of rapid prototyping that came out of engineering and software design, now applied to all kinds of different functional aspects of the organization. I love the notion that he's got, we're doing big A agility and little A agility. Lots of people can make contributions to this and try things out and tailor them, learn from them. If they work, we scale them up. If it's a failure, we learn from that and make adjustments in the things that we do. So we can take on big risks with different parts of the organizations, but everybody can participate with little A agility in that. So the presentation is just chock full of examples of the organization addressing each of these pieces. And what Sue and I have tried to do in the middle here is suggest that all of those pieces happen together as people engage. And it doesn't matter what part of the organization you're in, you're automatically or should be automatically engaged in those 4 routines. But maybe the biggest point I want to make out of Eric's presentation is it's not just that they're engaged. They're engaging in all 4 of these activities over and over again, and as they engage in them, they're learning. I think one of the key pieces that comes out of, and I think one of the things that Sue and I were most surprised about when we first were talking to Eric about this, is how much of this work is being done inside each of the organizations. They've learned that it's not just a human resource function's responsibility to handle row and implement GPS, but each of the functions, whether it's supply chain or design or retail or digital channels, each of those organizations is coming up with these ideas, and there's a conversation that's happening inside a GAP where they're learning from each other and how to coordinate. I think that's the real essence of where agility is going to come from, is how well they've begun to learn how to adapt these different agile processes in these different functions. And so with that in mind, I think I'll stop chatting and see if we can pull out some questions from the audience, and we've got 5 or 6 minutes. Maybe we can address or at least listen to some questions that people might have about Eric's situation or about the change management model per se. Let's see. Sue or Eric, have you caught up on any of these questions in here? There's a bunch of them.
Yeah, I think one of the questions, I don't know if, can you hear me? Am I?
Yep, I can.
One of the questions that was earlier was when, Eric, you were talking about Agile and the application of that through the whole organization, and the big A and the little a. And I think people were wanting to know exactly what does it mean to apply it through the organization, or a little bit more specifically, what does it mean to make that part of the core. I would say that's a critical piece of what we think the change capability has to be in the future. And if you could just say a little bit more about that. You've been working on that now, I think, for 2 or 3 years, how to conceptualize that.
Sure. So I think, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think there's several different approaches at once that we're taking. So one is more formal, and we are starting with HR really just because we have the aspiration and we can be a good pilot group, and that is formal training and indoctrination in the organization for the strict Agile development method, which is an evidence-based methodology with a set of steps that you follow in a certain pattern for project management, and that is to change for those big initiatives, and these would be things like the ones I showed you, really large enterprise scale initiatives with strategic importance. We want to move in the future from managing them in a traditional sequential waterfall fashion, which is slow, to an agile iterative fashion that incorporates those components of rapid prototyping, cross-functional collaboration, iteration, continuous improvement, et cetera. But what we're doing also is changing the cultural values, and that's at the CEO level of what people get rewarded for. And so the new CEO is taking his leadership team off-site this next week, and they are going to merge with a new set of clear leadership values that will emphasize things like collaboration and empowerment, for example, in the organization, that will then be built into the reward system to cause little a, agility, to be catalyzed throughout the organization. In other words, we're going to place a higher premium on behaviors that lead to adaptation and agility than on things like perfection. Does that make sense?
Yep, it does. It does. And I think that a question that just came in was, what kind of did you develop your own training, or what kind of training are you actually doing on this in this area?
We partnered with a third-party Agile expert vendor based out of the Midwest who specializes in the translation of engineering Agile software development into a language and a method that you can apply to any production process, including the hiring of a person, the production of training, the development of a garment, whatever. They've worked with a number of other large organizations who have implemented it throughout their functions to increase their speed and agility. So we are just piloting that right now. We've gone through our first sets of training, and we're applying it officially to this Streamlined Hiring initiative so we can learn from that and then scale it to other business initiatives.
Okay.
Carrie, can you, I think Linda has her hand raised. If we could unmute her. Linda, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. Fascinating session altogether. But the question I had was, is there no place for conventional linear change management? I'm thinking really in terms of things like mergers and acquisitions, which are very specific. Could you apply Agile, certainly Agile with a capital A and possibly subsequently the small a, to a context like that?
We would say yes, but we're going to learn since we're new to this. And what we would assume is something very similar to what we're assuming right now about our product pipeline, which is that it is not necessary for everything we do to be iterative, agile, et cetera. For example, as we produce basic products, things that don't change much season to season, like basic white t-shirts, for example, we probably could continue to produce them on a longer pipeline where we may get some cost advantages, while for fashion items, we need to be fast and iterative. I think this applies as well to other sorts of processes within the business context, that we probably will have a mix of traditional waterfall project management, agile projects, and agile project management.
I think that's absolutely right, Eric and Linda. That's what we found kind of in the agility study around organizations. Was most organizations it's not that everything is changing all the time. There are core processes, core functions, core capabilities, and the organization needs to apply a more or less traditional, efficiency-oriented set of practices against those things. However, the organization is also clear about where does it need to be flexible, and where does these changes that are happening along multiple dimensions or multiple functions, where do those things have to be flexible and approached in a different way? So one of the things we think of that's neat about the engage and learn model is it sort of allows a traditional process to exist underneath it, but it handles a lot more complexity than the traditional model might otherwise by itself.
Right. Thanks very much, both.
I have a question. This is Sue. Eric and Chris, I mean, all of us should actually be thinking about, and that is the whole function of controlling an organization and the definition of what that really means and how that has to shift it's sort of like you have to go to a higher level and say control will happen because you've suddenly got people who are empowered to adapt and to come up with new ways of doing things rather than expected to do their part in a sort of a master puzzle. This is an absolutely huge transition, I think, for most managers. And the other question, and this responds to a row question that's in the chat box as well, is does it fit everywhere? And I think we've started a little bit to answer that second one. But I'm wondering what you're thinking about. What is the nature of control, which used to be a core managerial function in this new environment?
Yeah, I would say this is a fundamental 21st century shift as a result of globalization, digitization, that's placed a premium on rapid change and iteration, that really managers are needing to become performance coaches and outcome coaches, and that really the whole essence of Agile is getting aligned on outcomes that customers are looking for, and then freeing up the system for the means to get there, that most of the time the means are meandering rather than linear. And the problem with traditional management practices like performance management, where you set goals at the beginning of the year and everyone sort of aligns themselves and sticks to them throughout the year, is that actually inhibits the kind of learning and flexibility towards getting to the right outcome that you need today. So we're going through and challenging all of the practices inside the company that have been conventional wisdom forever and saying, do we really need those kinds of controls, or are they in fact preventing us from doing the exact thing we are admonishing employees to do, which is to be adaptive and change? So in essence, it's causing us to have to put more emphasis on being aligned on what the outcome needs to be, and more emphasis on coaching people to learn and grow, and less on monitoring people's compliance to set rigid practices.
It almost demands you go to a results system, not just in your individual performance management, but in your company performance management as well.
Yes.
And the other thing I would add is there's got to be this balance of long-term and short-term. If in the absence of a long-term set of issues, and in the absence of awareness about the way things are changing, you could see a monthly or quarterly system improving on and getting better and better at the thing that works today, and not thinking about how to get better and better at the things we're going to need for the future. So I think management control has to continue to infuse those monthly and quarterly conversations with issues about how are you going to be effective today, and what are you doing to be ready for the future, and here's some ideas that we have about what's going to happen in the future, and we hope you're paying attention to that as part of your own individual development. So finding that balance between the long and the short term, I think, is part of the management control problem today.
There was one question. I don't know if the person's still on the line. Eric, are you willing to share your third-party vendor? So we go from control philosophy to the real nuts and bolts here.
Sure. So we work with the Agile Transformation company. It's based, I believe, out of Michigan. I'll have to double check. But I'm happy to send their contact information to you, Sue, after the call, so you can make it available. We've had a great experience with them.
Thank you. We have overextended our use of your time, Eric. We so appreciate your joining us for yet another webinar. What you're doing has been just a wellspring of knowledge for, I know, that the change stuff that we're doing, the agility and org design, but also for all of our HR work that we're doing in CEO. So thank you very much for sharing what you're doing.
You're welcome. Thank you for the privilege to share.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yep.
Yeah, many of you are from long-term friends as well, and from companies that have been long-term supporters, and we really appreciate that. And Chris, you want to say something about our upcoming webinar?
Only that we hope this has enticed people and tickled your brain a little bit, and we'd love to see you come out to the change management course that we got going in February.
where we get into this new framework and model for change.
We try and dig into it, and I think some of the other questions too have been about how it relates to sustainability, and we definitely cover that in the session and talk about how change and sustainability are kind of good bedfellows.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thanks everybody. Thank you again, Eric.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you, Chris and Sue.